Welcome to Dr. Tereza Джил. It's an honor to have you join us today. Your profound work in helping survivors of trauma and abuse, coupled with your dedication to educating and empowering others, I believe makes your voice essential in these conversations. Thank you very much for being here.
And thank you for inviting me.
Would you like to tell us more about yourself, professionally, and if you want, personally also?
It's interesting because several weeks ago, I met up with some friends and we were talking about who we were personally and professionally. And we kind of all agreed that our professional and our personal selves are intertwined. It's not like we go to work, like I'm a professor and then I'm a therapist, and then I cut that part of my life or those roles out, and then I come home and I'm different to friends or family or partner. They are weaved in together. And I think what weaves them together is that I truly enjoy the relationships with my students, the relationships with my clients, the relationships with my significant other, who I feel blessed with, and my children, and my friends and family. And the intention may be different. When I'm in the role of teacher, there's an intention and there's an agenda to teach them psychology or abnormal psychology, and to give them the foundation knowledge that they need so that they can get to the end of the course and feel like they've gotten the information that they needed in order to move forward. With a client, the intention is to hold them so that they can heal. And so I can be by their side in their process and in their journey, many times, which is painful, but it's also filled with joy. But so the key thing that weaves all those roles together, personal and professionally, is the relationship. And I come in as the same person, but my intention and what I'm going to be doing in each of those roles will be different.
Well, it makes sense and sounds beautiful and very to the core of who we are.
And I think that's part of who we need to be if we're going to be healers, and it's who we need to be no matter what relationship we're in. And it's actually simple to do, but I don't think we're taught to do it, which is to be present, which is to be open, which is to be non-judgmental, which is kind of like holding our arms out so that we can receive and let also the process be spontaneous. Have fun, but at the same time be able to be serious enough to be present for somebody when they are in pain.
What led you to specialize in working with survivors of sexual abuse? Because it's a serious topic.
Well, my first job, I was working in a prevention program where I did home-based family therapy. And I was working with mostly single mothers, but also families who the judge saw that there was abuse and the child was at risk. So if the child was at imminent risk, they were taken out of the home and put into foster care. If the child was at risk, they would want the child to stay at home. But either way, they wanted the family to have family therapy to manage the issues so that either their child could stay at home or their child could be returned to the family. So my job was to help balance the family, give them the skills that they needed and the theories that they needed and the support that they needed so that they could either bring their children home or keep their children at home. So that was the first 3 years of my practice experiences. All of those women were sexually abused. I knew that was not the goal of the therapy that I was being paid to do. I was being paid to work on their skills and imminent safety so that children could be returned home or stay at home. So it was more like concrete services, and there really wasn't the ability to go back. And again, they were mandated clients by the court. Mandated clients usually bring in a certain amount of resistance and defenses because they don't want to be in therapy. So you can't really push people to look at things that they're not ready to. And the trauma that they were experiencing in the moment was having their kids be taken from them. And so that's what we dealt with. So then what happened is about 2 years into my work, there was an agency that was running a sexual abuse survivors group with 8 women and a therapist. And the groups were happening in the agency, but they lost their funding. So they lost the ability to have the group be housed in the agency, and they lost their therapist. So these 8 women decided that they did not want to break up. They wanted to continue as a group. So they decided to hire a therapist, and they found 5 therapists in the community, and all 8 women interviewed the 5 therapists. They also found a church in the area that offered them a free room to do the groups. So I was interviewed by 8 women. 5 other therapists were also, and I was picked. Lucky me. And so they divided up payments to split amongst each other. So it was really kind of different because they hired me to facilitate their group. So it really changed the dynamics and the power in the relationship. So that is where my learning and growth and commitment to working with that population grew. So we probably lasted for about 2 years, but it's from that group that my private practice grew, because clients would tell clients to tell clients. And the interesting thing is that they would actually kind of screen the clients for me, because they would say, like, this one woman was in 12-step recovery for addiction, and she would have her yearly anniversary. So you would talk about your history and what brought you to the addiction. And she brought up that sexual abuse was part of what brought her to using, because it helped to manage her flashbacks. It helped her dull her feelings, and it helped to dull her memories. And that was her coping strategy. So many people after her talk came to her and said, "Who's your therapist?" And she said, "Yeah, I didn't send you Nancy because Nancy has too many issues, but I think you really like Thelma. So Thelma's going to be giving you a call." So it was like that my practice evolved, and where my skill level for dealing with sexual abuse started to grow. I immediately hired a supervisor, and that was kind of critical, a supervisor that was trauma-informed. And I would meet with him weekly to discuss some of the dynamics in the group and to get feedback.
How often were the group meetings with these 8 women?
Once a week for 2 hours. And sometimes it went over to 2.5 hours. I think in some ways you have to give leeway for working with trauma survivors, because you can't open up the wound and not somehow bring it together before you leave.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. So these strict hours of like these 50-minute sessions, sometimes it's just not going to work. And so it would be 1.5 hour sessions or 1 hour and 15-minute sessions. and you work within what the client needs.
Were those women your first not mandatory clients? Because you said I started my practice practically there.
They were the first clients who were voluntary. That's also a very different way of working with people.
They were very
proactive and strong and intentional and committed to their healing.
My heart goes to them and to you and to your supervisor.
And thank goodness for my supervisor, because I felt in some ways I was just thrown in. My clients taught me about the issues related to sexual abuse. They informed me what the issues were, what the vulnerabilities were, where the healing needed to be. And I just had to listen really well. And if I got stuck, I went to him, and he was brilliant and excellent. He held me well when he was supervising me, and gave me not only insight, but real direction and skill about how to manage difficult feelings. Because at that time I worked with the body. It wasn't just talking.
Oh, okay.
It was what we call release work. So it was like being able to hold people while they went back. So the way that I see the healing, and not everybody sees the healing this way, but more and more people today are. Back then, not really, is that you have the pre-trauma here, then you have the trauma, and then you have the post-trauma. So where people got stuck was that there was nobody there for them after the trauma. We can heal as little ones if there was somebody there to help us process it and to help us protect from the experience, and to also stop any further abuse from occurring. And so what happens is they get stuck in the trauma, and that changes their physiology, it changes their brain chemistry. And as you know, in CI, it's like, what was the belief that was made at that time? I'm bad. There's something wrong with me. I'm unlovable. The world is a scary place. And so our job is to stand alongside them and be for them what they didn't have when they were younger, to help them to metabolize the experience and to go to post-trauma.
Yes, that's very valuable to know. I believe that the colleagues that are listening are taking notes right now. I have here with me your book, Women Who Were Sexually Abused as Children. It's a wonderful book and full of expertise and inspiration. Can you share an overview of the book and its primary message for the readers?
Well, again, that was another gift that my clients gave to me. When I was in school, I would write papers on, the impact of child sexual abuse on the individual and how it maintained itself through their life. Like issues like low self-esteem, addictions, depression. And so I understood how it impacted the individual, but I never thought about how it impact their mothering, which is a vital role that many women take on. Not all women take it on in their life, but many do. And so it would make sense that if you're experiencing depression and anxiety or addictions, it's going to impact a primary role in your life as a mother. And not much literature is on that. There's a lot of literature on how child abuse, physical abuse, impacts mothering, but not a lot on how sexual abuse in particular impacts your mothering. And the literature that's out there on how child abuse affects your mothering is that it gets reenacted. Abusive mothers abuse their children. However, if you look at the subjects that they used in their research, one article I read, peer-reviewed, said that mothers who were physically abused as children physically abuse their children. Statistically significant. And then I looked where they got their population from, their subjects from. They got them all from the child abuse hotline. They had already been hotlined in and found by the judge to have abused their children. So, of course, their results are going to be that they all abuse their children because that was the population that they pulled from.
Yeah.
But what happened to me was that when I asked women, because all therapists ask, why you're in therapy and what do you want to work on? And the mothers all said, I want to work on being a better mother. I realize that my past abuse is impacting the way I mother my children. And I don't want to pass on those wounds to the next generation. When I fantasize about what I want to be as a mother and what I want for my children, I want them to be protected from what I experienced. So I asked, give me an example. And one woman said that she has 2 daughters, both under the age of 5, and they want her to play with them. And they want her to go sleigh riding. And for her to go sleigh riding and to scream and to be spontaneous and have that much freedom actually overwhelms her because she comes in kind of stiff and controlled and collapsed. So going sleigh riding is the absolute opposite of what she knows to feel safe and defended. This was the same woman who said, she has a playroom for her kids and they got dressed up in gowns and they set a tea party with cups and tea kettle and cookies. And she sat at the small chair while they were playing and she couldn't move. And she said, when I was growing up, you wanted to be invisible. You wanted to be quiet. You didn't play because you were at risk to be noticed. You wanted to be small and hidden. Mm-hmm. And in order to be there for my girls, I need to be fully present and visible. And I don't have the skills. And it saddens me when I sit there that I don't have the ability to be free and spontaneous and to connect with them in the way that I want to. Another woman said to me that when she was the same age that her daughter was abused, she was the same age when her daughter was 5, when she was abused, she started to have flashbacks. So when she was doing intimate parenting, as we call it, like bathing her daughter or even having her daughter sit on her lap while she read a book, she would have flashbacks of her own abuse with her uncle. And she would start to shake and she would start to have terrible thoughts about who she was. And she kept it to herself. All of it was a reenactment of her whole own abuse, where she shook and had terrible thoughts about herself and couldn't tell anybody. She didn't want to tell her husband and she didn't want to tell her doctor because she thought that they would take her daughter from her. So she kept it a secret and she relinquished her parental responsibilities, the more intimate parenting, the more emotional parenting, to her husband. He put her daughter to bed. He told her nighttime stories. He would give her spontaneous hugs. She became obsessive compulsive about keeping the house clean, because like an overcompensation, keeping the house clean, having supper, lunch, and dinner on time, and organizing play groups, and keeping things moving in the family in concrete ways, doing the laundry, doing the dishes, etc. But she relinquished the other responsibilities, and she wanted to be able to engage in those. And then another woman said to me, and I think this was finally the shift for me, she said, I've already experienced the sexual abuse once as a child. I'm willing to go back and look at it again in order to be a better mother. But it infuriates me that the perpetrator never had to feel the consequences of the abuse even once. And I thought, that's pretty powerful. And that goes against the literature that I read. That goes against all the articles that have said that trauma repeats itself each generation. These are women that wanted to do something different. And I feel like, how could we harness that strength? What is it that makes them resilient? What is it that empowers them to do something different? And the image that I have is like in the Superman movie. They wanted to turn back time, and that Superman goes up to the universe, and he has to take the earth with great strength and turn it around so that they could start again. And I feel like that's exactly the process of what mothers need to do when they say no more. It stops here. Never again.
I want to share some statistics because sexual abuse is a heavy topic. And it's, of course, worldwide. But I want to share some statistics from my country, from Bulgaria, just to put it out there, to be known. According to statistics, reports that was made in 2021, 22.6% of women in Bulgaria aged 18 to 74 have experienced some sort of sexual violence after the age of 15. This includes actions by known or unknown persons. How does sexual abuse in childhood shape a survivor's sense of self and relationships later in life? How does it affect motherhood? You mentioned some things about it, in particular motherhood.
Well, the interesting thing is that the statistics are the same in the United States. A little bit more, so 1 out of 4. So the statistics are quite large. And a primary issue is that most perpetrators are known to the child.
Yes.
Complicates the situation. So families, to educate their children, always say, be careful with strangers, don't talk to strangers. But abuse usually happens within families or people that are considered, if they're not actual blood related, people that are considered friends and connected to the family. And no one really wants to look at that. There's really a veil of silence in terms of talking about sexual abuse. It's a hard topic. Nobody wants to believe it exists. And if you asked 25 years ago, if you asked psychologists how many women were sexually abused or boys were sexually abused, they would say less than 1%. And yet it's 25% in our country, probably higher. Because people don't report the abuse. There is a veil of silence around it, given to abuse and trauma. I think when people say trauma, they're not saying explicitly sexual abuse. They're talking trauma. And I think in some ways that also creates a veil of silence for sexual abuse and makes it more difficult to talk about. So in terms of answering your question about how childhood abuse shapes adult lives, in my first group, the first thing we do is I ask the question. It's actually a really bonding question, and they actually have fun with it. It's serious, but it's also fun. I have a chalkboard and chalk, and I ask them to list all the ways that the sexual abuse has impacted them as adults. Because if you ever need any answers to anything, you just ask the client. They'll tell you. And so some of the things that they said is that they have low self-esteem. They have a sense of self-hatred. They have problems with intimacy and closeness. They don't feel comfortable with their bodies. They feel dirty, like damaged goods. They feel really naive. They feel easily taken advantage of. They're people pleasers. They feel shame and isolation. They feel worthless. And so these things that they feel as a child are the things that they bring into their roles as adults and mothers.
How can parents who are survivors of abuse protect their children and break this intergenerational trauma cycle?
There is a beautiful quote by Selma Freyberg. Sometimes I'll be reading and I'll read something and it just stops me in my tracks. And this was a quote that stopped me in my tracks. So she was talking about the inability to respond to a child's needs, and what she said was, a mother's whose own cries have not been heard get passed down to her children. So if a mother has been hurt and she hasn't dealt with her own pain, whatever defenses that she used to manage that pain, whether it's disassociation, shutdown, numbness, fantasy, denial, when she hears the cries of her own children, she will use those same defenses and as a result can't be attuned and can't respond. So one of the most important things for survivors is to do their own healing. I mean, there's this man who did a lot of stuff on family systems, and he said in a meeting, in a conference, he said, you know, somebody misquoted me and said that I had said that 90% of American families are dysfunctional. He said, that's not true. 100% of American families are dysfunctional. And I think because nobody goes through life unscathed, all of us have our stories that have impacted us. And those stories that have impacted us or have put a lid on who we are and our ability to grow, our ability to enjoy life and connect with others, be attuned to ourselves and the world, to be able to feel the sunshine on your face, to be able to get joy from looking at the first spring flowers, or joy from little children playing with one another. It's important that we go back and we deal with those hurts. So whatever keeps us in that trauma response, we need to be able to dip into that so that we can move forward. Otherwise, our entire life is filtered by the lens of being stuck in the trauma and the beliefs and the emotions that never got to be released or dealt with. And once we're freed from them, there are two. We learned that one, we didn't die, we survived. Because what happens in that trauma response is two things. I'm going to die or go crazy. And so what did you employ in order to maintain life? And sometimes it's about constriction and making yourself really small, or sometimes it's about fight, flight, and being really overly reactive, and to be angry, and to...
What are some of the misconceptions about the healing journey for survivors of sexual abuse?
I'm not sure if the survivor has the misconception or the therapists have the misconception. I think that when a client comes in, many of them are in such pain by the time that they surrender to therapy and that they need help and that their own devices are not working, that they kind of almost hand themselves over to you. And they're not necessarily expecting anything. But I think that as therapists, we have certain expectations of what the healing journey should look like. And I do. My expectations of what the healing journey should look like is usually related to the programs that I've paid lots of money for in order to learn a certain skill or to learn a certain type of theory to work with clients. So my theory is that we go back and we retrieve the little ones that got lost in the past, that need to be heard, need to be visible, need to be given space so that we can move forward. However, when I interviewed the women for the book, they said that is not all they need. They said they need insight, they need therapy to work out their past, and that's important, but that's not the whole story. They need, because they didn't have models in their lives, they need to have really concrete skills of how to deal with ruptures in relationships, how to communicate effectively. Many of them didn't see effective communication. Many of them didn't see emotions that were dealt with without being harmful, like, anger or sadness or despair. They had no places to go with those, or they didn't have parents that modeled it well, particularly in like overt physical abusive homes. And so they don't have a clue or the skills of what to do differently so not to reenact the next generation. And this is really important because Bowen, who's a family therapist and works with intergenerational trauma, one of the first, and works with the genogram to look at how patterns are passed down and what patterns are passed down. He says it takes 10 generations of dysfunction, and each generation gets worse and less equipped to deal with life's issues. And by the 10th generation, you have schizophrenia. So it's really important that a woman is able to say no more. I'm stopping this, and this is what I need. And what they've said is, I want to work on my own issues. I want to work on the past as it interferes with the present, but I also want concrete skills. When my child acts out and I need to discipline them, I want to know some really important and non-abusive ways to discipline my child. Because many times with discipline, they'll either be overreactive or they'll shut down and they'll renege on their responsibilities because they're so fearful of abusing their kid. They don't have tools. They don't have models. So they want really concrete skills. They want education. They want feedback. And so we have to give that too. And it may not be that us as a therapist who works with trauma and with the individual and going back, they may need to take a parenting education class separate from what they do with us. And we may need to bring in, close supports so that they can work at problems with each other. Many times my clients would say to me, can I bring in my husband? Can I bring in my girlfriend? Can I bring in my wife? Because they don't know what I'm doing. They think it's weird, or they see me changing and they don't know who I am anymore. Can I bring them in so that you can convey to them what kind of work we're doing here and why it's important?
Now, somewhere in our conversation, I realized something and I want to share it, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
As a trauma therapist, I don't work with children, but now I've realized that I basically work with children all the time. I work with inner children. So that's what I do. I work with children.
Absolutely. And I didn't work with children either. And I made a decision about not working with children because I was asked to be in a social worker in a school program.
Oh.
And for me, it's like the children aren't the problem. It's the families that they live in.
Yes.
That are the problem. And that children are at imminent risk. And if you can't get the parents on board, you're not changing the child. You're not changing a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old who is living in violence or dysfunction or chaos or lack of connection, that it really is a family systems issue. And school systems want you to change the kid so the kid can function in the classroom. It's almost an impossible task unless you bring the parents in to work with them. So for that reason, I didn't work with children. because in those contexts, you weren't allowed to work with the parents. Well, you're in the school system and you're working with kids. But we work with the inner child all the time. And I think one of my gifts from my clients and from doing this work, which is why I think I earlier said I couldn't separate who I was as a professional from a person, is because working with those inner children taught me a lot. It taught me how children get hurt. It taught me how children suffer. It taught me how children will sacrifice themselves for the greater whole, for the family, by keeping silent, and will endure pain. And so they taught me what children need in terms of a tone of voice, in terms of attunement, in terms of caring. They need very little. They need connection and safety and to know that they're loved. And that has really helped me be a mother, much better mother to my children, and to also know that when I deal with my significant other of 40 years, it's actually more than 40 years, but I stopped counting. Very long time. I know that his little kid is there. And when I talk to him, I'm very aware of how his little kid got hurt. And I'm very aware not to do anything to reenact that. And so all the time, no matter who we're talking to, there is like a circle of little ones behind them that are watching and that are being impacted by the interaction. So I try to, while I'm talking with the adult, embrace all the little ones, because they only need acceptance and understanding and non-judgment and playfulness. I do it with my students, I do it with my clients, and I do it with my family members and friends.
Yeah. That brings me exactly to my next question. What role does compassion and better understanding play in the recovery process, and how can it be nurtured?
Compassion is essential. There is no healing unless there is compassion. And compassion has to do with thoughtfulness, caring, and attunement. And again, knowing how that person got hurt and making a commitment not to do anything that will trigger that hurt. Even if it doesn't make sense to you, even if you minimize how that person got hurt and what they think is painful, to know it just is for them and to do something different. So there's no healing unless there's safety, and there's no healing unless someone feels attuned, and they'll know if you're attuned to them or not. So if I could just read a quote from Carl Rogers.
Yes.
I'm realizing as I get older, all the people I love are dead. But I'm still loyal to them. So Carl Rogers said, when the other person is hurting, confused, troubled, anxious, alienated, and terrified, or when he or she is doubtful of self-worth, uncertain as to identity, then understanding is called for. The gentle and sensitive companionship of an empathic stance provides illumination and healing. In such situations, deep understanding is, I believe, the most precious gift one can give to another. And I think that just sums it up. It's like the gem that we should hold as therapists and as people working and being with others. So compassion is the contradiction to how people got hurt. And it's being present with an open heart. And the open heart is like reaching out with your hands and accepting all of who the person is without the head that's trying to judge or contradict or belittle, but just keeping an open heart, which is not something that, one, they talk about in schools, or two, they talk about in my culture much.
That's common understanding for us therapists. And this quote really beautifully sums it up: gentle understanding and compassion. But how can friends and family members provide meaningful support to survivors without overstepping?
So the overstepping is a violation. And that's what happened to abuse survivors. They got violated, and it could actually end up being a trigger. So overstepping can actually cause fight or flight, and can actually cause collapse because it's intrusive. If you want to help a survivor mom, you ask them, how do you need help? It's as simple as that. What can I do to support you? It's as simple as that. I don't think we even ask those questions of the people that are close to us. We do as therapists, but we need to also do it to our children, our significant others, our friends. How can I be helpful? And they'll tell you. And they may not know at first because it may be such a new question. It's like, well, helpful? I don't know. I believe that one way to be helpful, and this is what I do when I work with mothers, but when I also have family with the next generation below me who have kids, is when I'm being attentive, let's say to a niece or a neighbor or a friend, I bring in their children at the same time. I'm kind to their children, talk to their children. I connect with their children as well as connect to the mother. And kind of model how it's not just like the mother is here at the adult and then the children are here, but how can you come together and be with one another in kind of a joyful, playful, or even serious way? I actually get a lot of pleasure from doing that. So I know that I had 2 nieces, and from my brother's side, and they were going through a divorce. And I knew that that was going to be hard for them. And it was very hard for them because it wasn't a nice divorce. And so, and this again comes from the lessons I've learned from my clients. Because I would ask a client, which is a good question to ask, how did you survive? So really terrible abuse. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. How did you survive? And this one woman said to me, I had an aunt that I would visit once a year. And we lived in New York. She lived in California. And I would visit her once a year for 1 week. And we would sit in bed and watch movies. She would take me out shopping for clothes. We would have fun and go to the zoo and go for walks in the park. And it was just me and her and me. And I knew that I was safe and I was able to be playful and spontaneous, and I knew I was loved. And she said, in my darkest times when I was at home, what saved me was I would think of her. And I knew it would be a year, but I could wait because I knew she was there. And I feel like, okay, I'm going to be that light in the darkness. So I connected to my nieces. My mother was old, and was somewhat disabled in terms of her physical capacities. On Saturdays, I would bring my nieces over and we would have a tea party with my mother. And so she would be in a chair and she couldn't move a lot, but there would be 3 generations there. And we would have cookies, and we would serve tea in fancy teacups, and we would just talk and be with one another. I would talk to them about doing adventures. What adventure would you like to do? And we would go to the park, or we'd go sleigh riding, and to just connect with them purely for who they were. On Christmas, we would buy presents for people. We would wrap them together, and we would think about how to stage a play for when the family was there. I get great joy from being with children and being present and holding a space for them so that they can be who they are and they can grow and flourish. And I think that if we can do that, and again, that came from my client who gave me that story about her aunt. It's like, oh, you just need to know that one person that loves you, that cares for you, that opens your heart when you think about them, that gives you safety. It's like, be that person.
As a trauma specialist, as a trauma-informed therapist, it gets heavy sometimes. And I wanted to ask you, how do you stay grounded and emotionally resilient in your work as a trauma specialist?
I feel like there are things I need to do, not just as a therapist, to stay grounded and emotionally resilient. There are things I just need to do as a person living this life. So with my own triggers and with my own places where I get challenged, I do yoga and I do meditation. I have a spiritual practice, and that's really important to me. It helps keep me in present time. Eckhart Tolle said is you want to go to the place between the thoughts. Go to the place underneath and above the thoughts, because that's where peace is and that's where presence is. And so just to be really aware of when the thoughts and the stories come in, because they can really flood you. So I have a practice of being aware of that, taking space and coming back to the breath and coming back to the body. Yoga helps me do that. Meditation and prayer helps me to do that. I really love to travel and go to new places. I mean, it's just as simple as, maybe for some people it's not so simple, but for me it's as simple as being in Spain and having a cup of cafe cappuccino. It's like, yeah, life is perfect. Sun on my face, being with my significant other. I've done like the Camino de Santiago like 4 times, and makes me happy. Being with children makes me happy. Being with family makes me happy, and it keeps me grounded. But I also think that it's really important to have a supervisor. This is not easy work. We're going to get stuck. Being stuck means that we're being triggered, or we haven't worked through something that we need to move through in order to be more open and present for that client. So being stuck is fine. What's not fine is not knowing that you're stuck. We just need to know when we're stuck, and we need to ask a supervisor to kind of look above it all and to give us advice or insight or skills to better work with that client, so both the therapist and the client can move forward. And I think it's really important to be in self. Be in self as you do your work. Because really you're giving as yourself. And that means being connected to your heart and your head, and also being skillful. I mean, there are skills that you need to know. That's the head. And your heart is being able to be, use those skills, but your heart guides you in them.
That was inspirational. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your presence, for being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to kind of have some more introspection and give some depth to the questions. that you asked.
Thank you, Teresa.